Yo, everybody, what is up? And welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Schools podcast. I'm Jason Gaddis, your host for this ride today that we're going to go on about relationships. This podcast is all about relationship, obviously. We talk about conflict, we talk about interpersonal neurobiology, attachment science, love, connection, etc. We certainly talk a lot about long-term partnership and all the challenges and victories that go along with that. But we also talk about family relationships, work dynamics, which we're going to talk about today. I'm psyched. But first, I want to give a shout out to Meal Steele. Meal wrote in and said, hey, my 2 cents is you dropped the numbering, labeling on Stitcher a while back at episode 217, and the numbering was helpful for you. So anyway, thank you, because you're saying I'm really into this, listening to every single episode chronologically, and I like hearing the changes along the way. So thanks for the feedback, and we've actually are looking into that and making changes if you haven't seen them already. So going back to the numbers. So folks, we do listen to you. If you got feedback for us, certainly you can leave us a review on iTunes. We love that kind of feedback. On Apple Podcasts, just swipe down with your thumb, boom, 5 stars, type in. It's always helpful. I like to read your reviews. But also, if you got feedback, you can email us at info@relationshipschool.com. Okay? If you want to hear more of something, less of something, etc. Excellent. All right, in this podcast, I have CrisMarie and Susan, who are experts in conflict, especially when it comes to the corporate world. I get excited when I talk to people like this because I am not in the corporate space. I've only spent 2 years there back in my 20s when I wore a tie, believe it or not, and Birkenstocks to work. I actually got reprimanded for wearing Birkenstocks at work when I was wearing a tie. I was not adhering to the dress code. Anyway, that was my little rebellion back then. Because I wanted to wear my Birks, guys. Yeah, anyway. All right, CrisMarie, who will introduce herself shortly, is a former Olympian, world championship rower. She was a Boeing engineer, and she worked for Arthur Andersen. So she's an executive business coach. Oh wow, I didn't even talk to her about this. She's a member of Patrick Lencioni's elite consulting team. Wow, that's cool. She also co-founded this Thrive Inc. with Susan, who is her partner. She's a hip-hop dancer, painter, and community theater actress. That's cool. Susan, at the age of 24, when doctors gave her 6 months to live, she stepped into a leadership role in her life to deal with her healthcare providers to overcome cancer. She talks about that in the intro here when she introduces herself. And she's been a coach and educator over the last 20 plus years. And they met at one of Susan's programs. That's just kind of cool. So when she's not working, she loves skiing, golfing, and can be seen out working with the horses. Nice. I love these little fun facts about people. Cool. So I think you're going to like these two, and just appreciate having them on. They've got some wisdom here in the workplace. So see if this applies to you and your organization or the organization you work for. I think it's going to be helpful. All right, guys, enjoy. Welcome to the show, CrisMarie and Susan.
We're excited to be here. I'm CrisMarie.
And I'm Susan.
All right. Good to have you both here. We're going to get into conflict at the workplace, but before we do, I'm curious if you would each kind of introduce yourselves in a minute or less, like just so people, the listener, can orient.
Sure. I'm CrisMarie Campbell, and I am an Olympic athlete, have an MBA, and was started off as a Boeing flight test engineer, and then worked for Arthur Andersen in management consulting until I met Susan Clarke, when I saw her deal with conflict very differently, and we started our own business dealing with leaders and teams.
Nice.
And I came into the work that I do because I had a history with cancer. I had 4 cancers. And during that time, I worked with a lot of practitioners who all felt differently and particularly did not get along. The medical model didn't get along with the non-traditional model, all sorts of things like that. So I spent a lot of time seeing really smart people stay further apart than they needed to when I needed them to work together. So I learned how to deal a lot with conflict during that time and saw the benefit of moving through that. So
cool.
I'm passionate about that.
Okay. And Susan, right?
Yes.
So you kind of started to get into your story a little bit there. I'm just curious how you both got into this. Like if we rewind the tapes, maybe to your childhood or adolescence or college. Like
it all starts from there, doesn't it?
What was going on that had you be interested in this type of topic and then eventually help people?
Well, I guess I'll go since I sort of started it this is Susan. In my early 20s, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and about 9 months into the treatment protocol, a very aggressive protocol, they let me know that it wasn't working and that they didn't have any alternatives. And so I probably had about 6 months to live. And that was really a moment in my life that just changed everything, because I think I had always followed everybody else's direction. And I realized that I was going to have to do something different. And I started searching from spiritual practices to diets to non-traditional medicine to other approaches. And one thing I discovered, everybody had something that they thought would be helpful. But the other thing I discovered is nobody liked each other, nor would they like talking to each other. And so it was really difficult at times. And not only that, but my health had brought up all sorts of historical things in my life that I'd never dealt with. And so my family and the community that I'd lived and grown up in was kind of severed by conflict that started to come up. And all of that sort of led me to realize that one, conflict, when it surfaces, is painful, but it can be life-enhancing if you deal with it. And that's how I got so passionate on many levels, both from dealing with my medical team and all my different practitioners to dealing with my family and my community and all the things that had been unearthed because of that.
Yeah.
So that's how I got passionate.
Very cool. Makes sense.
Yeah.
This is CrisMarie, and I grew up, I say that I'm a professional conflict avoider. I don't like conflict. It doesn't feel good. And I grew up with an Army colonel who was angry and violent. And so every night at dinner was like running the gauntlet, hoping he would not explode on one of us. And I had an older sibling that really liked to press his buttons. I was younger by 7 years, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, what can I do to make that go away? Like change the subject, reframe what she said, talk about my achievements. And that's really what I started to do after once I stood up to him, I got angry and I told him to shut up. That did not go well. Yeah. It ended with me on the floor, and it was not pretty. And I decided then, I was about 13 maybe. And I thought, you know what? This is not worth it. I'm just going to shut my mouth, shut what I want, focus on being whatever he wants me to be, pleasing and achieving. And that's how I had like a D and a C and some Bs, and I went to all A's and went on to went into engineering because he said, go get an engineering degree, and was an Olympic athlete. My coach was very much like my dad. So I responded very like, okay, I'll do whatever it takes. Yeah. And so it actually became career limiting. I was at Arthur Andersen and I was a management consultant, and I was at a software company leading a team of 6 of other consultants. And we'd come up with a project strategy to solve the client's problems. And my senior manager came in and said, don't do that. You're going to do this. And I thought, that's not going to solve the client's problem. But I didn't say that. I instead did one of my tactics. Like I asked a question, like, do you think that's going to solve the client's problems? And he said, yes, get to work. And I was catapulted back to my dad's dinner table. So I shut up, did the work. Yeah. Lo and behold, we get to the end of the 6-month project. Arthur Andersen wants to garner more work at this client. So all the partners are around the table. Us project leaders are, on the sidewalls there. And the vice president that we had done this project for, this client, they asked him, how was that project? And he goes, well, that project CrisMarie led? And he pointed to me, he said, it was a disaster, a complete disaster. And I was like, oh my gosh. I thought, I have got to learn how to speak up to power, because this isn't going to help me. Yeah. And shortly thereafter, I met Susan, and the way she was dealing with a room that had kind of a bully in it. And she wasn't trying to be politically correct. She was real, but it totally transformed the conversation in the room, which I was like, I want to know how to do that. And we decided, that was over 20 years ago. And we started our business and have been working that way with teams and also couples to help them have real conversations.
Wow, that's so cool. And then you guys are life partners and business partners?
Yeah, I have to say, first we fell in love and then we started our business.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. I just want to kind of highlight one part of your story there around your dad kind of, I guess, shutting you down when you stood up to him, and how dramatically that changed the course of your life in terms of, oh, okay, cool, I'll shut up and just be an achiever. And it's just amazing how one moment in time can really change the course of our direction. But it's cool that you finally also realized to come back around, like, hey, I got to find my voice here. This doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it was, things got worse because I also, like, the turning point was that project, but I had also had chronic fatigue, chronic back pain from losing at the Olympics, which I was beating myself up because I wasn't perfect, and allergies and all sorts of stuff. And I kind of imploded at that same time that project failed, which led me to actually somebody introducing me to Susan. And then I realized, wow, I've got to process what I felt from those experiences, because I'm not going to change if I don't.
Yeah. And what's the Olympic activity you were involved in?
I was in the women's rowing team. Okay. So I was on the crew team, the women's 8. Yeah, in Seoul, Korea.
I mean, she lost only 3 races in her entire career. And when I first met her, I was so excited to meet an Olympian, and she just about bit my head off. Like, well, I'm a loser. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, that is the most insane thing. Yeah. You know, I was like, you got to work on that, because that is right. Like, and I know how really great, people who are elite, a lot of times it's 1 or 2 losses have just riddled their life with self-hate. And Absolutely. That is so hard to see because,
It was true. I'd become very brittle. Brittle was the word. I was trying to be more and more perfect because I couldn't cope with the fact that I had lost. Mm-hmm. And I see people now do that, executives trying to be perfect, and it makes them very brittle with their teams, so I've become softer and more familiar with failure.
Yeah, good for you. You got a good teacher next to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I failed fast and early and furiously, and it worked for me. No,
but you also, like, you guys you're both like pretty high achieving people, if we want to use that term, for overcoming cancer, being an Olympian. Like, there's just like, clearly there's some stuff going on in there that's like ambitious, and like you got a fight in you, and you want to learn things and grow, and that's pretty cool.
That I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, let's zero in on executives, since you mentioned that. Like, let's look at the kind of corporate world you guys are a part of today, and what are some of the core problems? I'm assuming conflict is one of them. People are conflict avoidant, or they just don't do conflict, or they do it poorly. What are some of the other sort of like maybe top 3 issues you see when you come into an organization?
Well, when we work, we often work at like Fortune 100 companies like Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Nationwide, all the way down to like tech startups. And we've been at Twitch and different companies. And what we see is that often you can see the signs that people aren't dealing well with conflict, in the sense of their meetings are really boring. So people are just doing status reporting around the table, or there's a lot of turnover. Or there's the meeting after the meeting, which is when all the real stuff gets talked about. And those are gossiping and, back channel politics and the teams. We always tend to work in the context of a team, because that's where you want to create those deeper relationships where you can trust each other. You can be human. You can say, I don't know, or I made a mistake, or even I'm sorry, to cultivate that level of trust versus I can't admit anything to you because I've got to get the promotion over you. That is just demoralizing environment.
I think too, a lot of times companies put into their values things like teamwork or respect, but they really have no concept. Like when we've gone in, they're rewarding people for individual performance. Their idea of a team is people competing against each other. Safety respect isn't defined, and we all have different. So it looks good on paper, right. But what's actually happening is pretty counter to everything.
They're not living the values, right?
Yeah, no. Exactly. Yeah. And so often a leader will say, and we've had different types. Some leaders come in and say, "There's something wrong with my team." And then,
can you fix them?
Can you fix them? And then there's the leader who calls us and it's like, I'm the one who I must be doing something wrong. And it's sort of interesting. Those are usually the two sides of the coin that we get. And it is it is a little marked, the difference between men leaders and women leaders. Men tend to call us and say, I have a problem. My team isn't functioning. Women tend to call and say, I have a problem.
It must be me.
It must be me. And that's an interesting dynamic as well.
So we usually wind up coaching the women leaders, but then start working with their teams, and vice versa. We'll start with the team, with the male executive or leader, and then start coaching.
And it's not totally that,
not black and white.
Sure.
Much more dominant.
The male ego, though, that speaks to the male ego a little bit, right? I don't want to admit, I've got too much on the line here to admit that I might be the problem.
Yeah, I think so. Because in the end, so often when we go in, we rely on the fact that the leader will be vulnerable. And sometimes that takes a little bit of work to get to.
Yeah, like massage.
Because if the leader isn't willing to show up and say, hey, this is me, this is what I'm struggling with, nobody else is going to do that.
Yeah.
Because they don't, it's like, okay, they're going to only be as safe, as vulnerable as the leader is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say you come in and there's so we have conflict, lack of conflict, whatever you call it. How do you guys address it? And what are some tools that you help teams with or leaders with when we start to learn how to have these kind of conversations?
Well, typically the intervention, we usually come in and we do a 2-day offsite, and we do that so the team has enough time to kind of sink in and stop trying to just dive into business problems. So we talk about doing both the smart and the healthy side, and they always want to get to the business problem, but we say, wait, just give us a little time on the healthy side, those interpersonal dynamics. And we give an overview of our model, and then we also do a team assessment. And so they get to see how they scored themselves. Yeah. And then we also do some styles. So that's pretty, benign, but people go, oh, no wonder we get along and no wonder we don't get along, based on styles. Yeah. So that kind of de-escalates some of that. And then we tend to teach them some communication tools to check out their stories. And we introduce that usually once in a while, somebody's brave enough to do it at that point, but we've laid the groundwork. And then we switch to their business strategy, where we're looking at kind of big picture questions. Why do you exist as a team? What are your values as a company, and all the way down to what's most important right now, roles and responsibilities, and how do you do your meetings?
And we really strongly encourage teams not to just pull out the marketing book, but because so often, you may have come up with some great wording, but if people can't sit around the table and use their own words and realize that they're aligned, then something's off. So, you really want it to be real time.
Yeah. And kind of the tenets or the key magic ingredients that we cultivate during this 2 days is people showing up more and more vulnerable. Now, we don't do anything like trust falls. It's like these little things that we do that help people open up and see this other person across the table as actually a human being that I can connect to. And that then to start to be curious about each other and each other's different points of view. Yeah. Which so often in meetings, people are trying to get, well, this is my idea. Well, this is my idea. They're not actually slowing down and saying, wait a minute, help me. That doesn't make sense to me. Help me understand it.
Right.
But when you do that starts the wheels spinning and the percolating of new ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask the obvious question, why is conflict a problem at these places that you guys, what's the big deal here?
Well, there's usually two different ways that conflict is an issue. One, there are the companies that are like, hey, we're really good at conflict. And 9 times out of 10, they just fight. And fighting is not actually conflict. That's just one side of a right or wrong equation. Yeah. Loud voices, the loudest or the leader isn't really healthy conflict. And then the other is what we call the kind of nice and polite. Nobody really wants to hurt anyone's feelings, so they're not actually saying. That's usually the water cooler version, because things get said behind people's backs. Or it's often in the nonprofit areas,
academics, hospitals.
They don't actually show up and say what they really need to say to each other, and as a result, there's actually a lot of conflict, but it's all underground, and sometimes that's actually the worst.
That's more insidious, right?
Yeah,
it is, and it's painful.
We call that a cancerous, a company that's dealing with the cancer of gossip and talking behind each other's back.
And so, would you say that most of the conflict you're dealing with then is that form?
Typically, what we find is that there's a team, and there might be one person who's more of a difficult personality, or a couple of people that have difficult personalities, and everybody's trying to fix that person through HR and working around them. and everybody else is talking behind their backs.
Yeah.
So we were working at a particular company in Northwest nice, their culture was. And the leader was a nice guy, but he kept relying on his right-hand guy, who was brilliant technically, but he did not play well with others. And so the leader kept undermining the teams. These were a bunch of CIOs. They were high-level people. It was a big company. And the leader basically undermined him because he kept deferring to his right-hand guy. And it wasn't until this is the second day, the end of the first day. And I don't know how we even invited this, but somebody finally spoke up and said, okay, Mike, well, I'll let you know. Every time that we speak up, it doesn't seem like you take our input. It seems like you actually defer to this guy.
It was a little harsher.
Okay.
It was a lot more.
A little more blamey.
A lot more heat on it.
Yeah, a lot more. And Mike, the leader, went just like bread. And you could see he was like,
what?
And he was upset. And he was like, wait a minute. And he actually, to his credit, said, we are almost at the end of the day. I don't even want to respond to this right now
because I won't respond
well. And I'm going to come back to it. And so we actually had a little bit of a conversation with him afterwards to kind of support him looking at it. And then we weren't sure where he was going to go with it, but it was like, this is kind of if you do this well, things could shift. You don't do it well, you may as, now you're seeing the real issue. And to his credit, he came back in the next day and came in saying, look, I realize this has really got to do with me. And I'm going to walk you through, why I've been the way I've been, but I also I need now to do it differently. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you, I want to make us a better team, not just have the smartest, answer.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it was pretty.
What happened is it totally transformed the team. They started to develop trust, and people would call him on him when and the guy that didn't play nice with others, when he lost his special status, after about 6 or 9 months, he was like, I'm leaving because he didn't have his, and to the credit, the leader was okay with that. Even though he was a brilliant guy, one brilliant person does not make an organization or a team.
That's right. Yeah. Hey there, quick interruption. Have you signed up for the Accepted and Connected Conflict Virtual Workshop yet? If not, you're missing out, guys. Last chance to get the early bird deal. Go to relationshipschool.com/connected. Here's what Jessica had to say about her experience.
For as long as I can remember, I've had one skill for dealing with conflict, and I'm really, really good at it. You might call it my superpower, and that's avoidance. So I will go to great lengths, metaphorical bombs could be going off, and I'm just gonna look and avoid it. And I've just come to a point in my life where I feel like maybe that's not the best way, and some other tools might be helpful. Like, I knew about the relationship school, but it didn't really seem like for me at this point, because I was thinking it was more about relationships and not so much about yourself. The conflict one sounded more like my alley, and so I wanted to try to learn some skills towards that. Most of my life I've been a pretty shut down person. Like, I'm the tough person, I'm really tough, I can do this by myself. I have friends, but I don't really make strong connections. It's hard for me to open up unless it's like someone I'm really close to. Or even just identifying that I have feelings has been really difficult for me, and I feel like coming here today, like, I don't even speak in big groups. Like, that's how fearful I can be. And I felt right away like this is an okay place to do that. Everybody's here for their own things, but we're all here together, and just seeing other people be brave and share, and then like I actually felt like I could speak up and share, which is totally foreign to me, but it feels really good, and I feel less like isolated. I would definitely recommend it to other people. I think sometimes, even if you think everything's okay, you don't really realize what you're missing until you get a picture of something else and you're like, oh wow, I didn't even know that I did this, or that this other option was out there. And sometimes you just think that maybe you don't belong, or like, I'm not a touchy-feely person, so this isn't for me. But it's not like that. It's for everybody who wants to learn more about themselves and learn how to relate to other people better. And I just really appreciate that.
Wow. Yeah, Jessica had a great experience and went on to study here at the relationship school. And she's right. It's a lot about your own work, guys. That's what gives you a great relationship, is doing consistent work on yourself. So come play with us, relationshipschool.com/connected to get the early bird deal. And we'll see you there. Back to the podcast. Okay, so that's an example of where there was a withhold, basically, and then the dam broke sort of once it was spoken, right?
Right.
Do you guys also help teams learn how to, okay, guys, if you have a problem, this is how we're going to do it from now on, and let's create an agreement about it. So can you walk us through something like that? So it's like, I think I'm guessing you're changing the culture of the organization by saying, here are some better communication tools when things get difficult, or so you don't have to talk shit about this person. Like, give us something there.
Right. Yes. The tool that we use, and you can think of an example, but the tool we use is Check Out Your Story, where we talk about, there's data that comes in, we all filter it through our own personal filters, and we pop out our own story. And then we feel, we have a certain reaction inside, interested or not. And then we have an intention, and then what we actually do. So we actually facilitate some of those people checking out their stories based on past experiences. And that helps. Oh, we did it and we survived and nobody died, that sort of thing. And it feels better.
Yeah. So it would look like, let's say you and I are working together. I would say, hey, I'm making up a story about you and I want to check it out, kind of thing. Does it look like that? Or?
I can give you kind of an example of where because we try to do this in real time, because usually something will show up in a meeting. And we were working with a company one time. It was a big electrical company, and it was a large, probably 12 people in the room. And there was this one guy who was actually the second in command, so a pretty significant player in the whole day. And he looked so uncomfortable. Yeah. Like he was often standing up against the wall when we were doing stuff. He seemed cranky. When he did speak, it was short. Mm-hmm. It's been a long time since I've seen anyone that uncomfortable. Yeah. And I thought, okay, this guy does not like what we're doing. And we had a whispering conversation ourselves about it. And of course, then we were introducing this. And so I said, well, I'll take a risk here, because I realized I'm kind of gossiping about you, this guy, Chad, and I said, and maybe I should check it out. And I kind of went, I've noticed this. I'm thinking you don't like what we're doing today. It's not, it's not uncommon, so I don't know what's happening for you. And I guess I want to check it out, because I have no idea. And we're going to start changing our plan based on, and it was fascinating. He was like, that is totally not it. I'm having back surgery tomorrow, and I made a special effort to make sure I could come to this event. And I'm incredibly uncomfortable, but I actually love what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So, it was it was a perfect example, because we would have totally changed the agenda. I hate to say it.
And you're misreading him, right?
Exactly. Yes. And people do that all the time. Yeah. We take a facial and we're like, it's about me. They don't like me. Yeah. Especially with leaders, we imbue the leader with so much, it must be about me, and change our behavior and make stories, and they grow.
Totally. My team does that with me. I get this intense look on my face, and I'm like, guys, and I'm just really but maybe I'm just listening like this with a furrowed brow. And everybody's like, oh my God, he's mad at me.
You and Susan have very similar brows and intensities. People misread Susan like, oh my gosh, she's really angry.
And sometimes I am, but most of I'd say 90% of the time I'm just listening. So it is an interesting dynamic. And the problem is a lot of times we've been taught to not bring things up that may appear awkward. Like, I also remember once I was speaking at a thing, it was a larger group of people, and we had asked them not to bring out their cell phones or whatever else. And we're always saying, deal with things when they come up. Yeah. So there was one guy in the front seat that was on front row, and I was getting myself just downright, I was angry, and finally I was like, okay, I can't last any longer. What are you doing? Like, we asked you pretty that way. Anyway, he was a translator. He was deaf. He was typing in to hear everything, and I had this moment where I was really embarrassed, but I also was like, okay, I'm glad I checked it out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but what I could have done is said nothing. And and a couple of people said, wow, I don't know how I would have ever dealt with that. And it's like, because it could have been totally inappropriate. And
I don't think you did it that gruffly. You did, but I see you working on that keyboard, and we said to put your cell phones away. So what's going on?
But things.
What about, I'm just curious about feedback. I read an article in the Harvard Business Review a while back last year about feedback being kind of, we do feedback, but it was actually an article that was kind of a counterpoint that's actually feedback is hurting certain organizations. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious where you stand with feedback in the workplace. Is that something you promote, or is it more just open dialogue, or like when someone comes up and says, hey, can I give you some feedback? That can be really off-putting for some people. So I'm curious where you stand on feedback.
Yeah, I think, we believe basically keeping your relationship clean. Mm-hmm. And so like getting in the habit of where it's not such a surprise, like, what, you want to give me feedback? So even at the end of each day, when we're doing a 2-day offsite, I will say 3 things I liked about what you did, Susan, and 3 things that didn't go well for me. And then we can hash it out. Mm-hmm. And she does the same for me.
And a part of that is because when we talk about this model, my feedback, one thing, it's telling you a lot about how I put the world together. It's not even about you, no matter, at what level. It helps you understand how I think. And then the second part, it may be useful to you if you can actually hear it more as, here's what I found helpful. Here's what I found hindering. Here's, what I disliked, and make that become normal, not something like, I've always hated the model where it's like you have to give 3 positives to give 1 negative. Everybody knows that's a sandwich. Yeah. And it's like, but if you practice knowing, of course, not everyone's going to like what you do, but they may have some insight about what they didn't like and give you something about the way you're doing that could be helpful to you. So if you think of feedback as different than just, I've got to change more, this is going to help me understand who this person is. It's also could be valuable to me as well.
Because she's more like a trigger to me if I'm giving her feedback. Like, I saw you do this. This is my story. This is what didn't work for me. That's all me. Yep. She could say, wow, that's interesting. It worked really well for me. But that's more keeping a hold of who I am and her keeping a hold of who she is, and building a culture where it's not so foreign to give each other feedback. And,
totally. It's part of the norm. And I liked what you just did there, where for Susan, it's like she gets to know you then.
Yeah.
That's like a frame I hadn't thought about, is like we're giving someone else feedback, but it tells a lot about the giver, right? And we can learn about this person.
Yeah, yes. It tells about my values, how I put my personal filter we talked about. It's all that's all my sifting through my filter.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. As we wind down, one other insight that could be useful for the listeners here, particularly at work. If I'm just thinking of the people that are listening, they're at work and they're kind of like agreeing, or they're like, yeah, I wish that was going on in my culture. What can like one individual do who's not a leader? Maybe they're a leader, but they're not like in a upper management position where they feel like they don't have a voice. What can that person do to start to maybe implement something like this in their culture?
Do you have something?
Well, I think this is in the line of what you're saying. So often when somebody is upset and distressed, it's because they interpret something happening that they don't understand, agree with, whatever else. Mm-hmm. And so I would always tell someone, wherever they are, even if it's their boss or tell me why this is so important to you. This question, when they are really upset, like instead of trying to get the other person to change or do something different, why is it so important to you that that you're not allowing us to bring somebody in from the outside to have a better conversation? What's going on? But to be genuinely curious when they ask the question. Yeah. And we've seen people, like we were working in a company in China where one group was like, literally, there was one woman who had a difference of opinion. They were literally physically going after that woman
to shut her down,
because it was like she had to change. Wow. And we kind of interrupted it, like, whoa, this is not okay. Does anyone remember any other way to deal with it? And this one guy said, well, I'm going to try this. And he went over and he said, I get you disagree with all of us, and I don't understand why your position is so important to you. And then she started to talk, and he was pretty genuine. And you could see lights go on as she talked, that she had an insight that was so different than anyone else's. But that was such a great example of breaking up the entire direction the company would have gone. They changed completely as a result of finally hearing this input they had never heard.
Well, just because of one person's curiosity, that's powerful.
Yeah, it really was.
And I just think, how you handle those moments. We're all pretty good communicators 95% of the time. It's those, really typical, uncomfortable moments, those 5%, and how you handle them makes all the difference. And if you can actually just not assume you're right, but, lay out what you're seeing and hearing, share your story, but then be tentative. Tell me where I'm wrong. I want to check it out with you.
Yeah.
What fits, what doesn't. Leave it open and consider that this other, sometimes it's so hard when Susan she's doing something. I'm like, oh my God, you have got to be kidding. I think it's just ridiculous. But if I can slow down and say, okay, help me understand this. Why is it so important to you? Any of those pieces can really make a difference. And at least I'm speaking up, which it helps me feel more whole in the workplace and has a lot of influence.
Yeah, it's very empowering, right? Versus just kind of squashing your own voice and going along with the party line.
Yeah,
yes.
I've been there, done that.
Yeah, right? So many of us have. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just a business issue. It's a whole cultural issue right now in our country to be able to speak up and have better conversations. So.
Yeah, I'm so with you. We need so much help here. Okay, cool. I always ask my guests this. One of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach 1 million teens and young adults with relationship education, conflict education, stuff like that. So this is right in line with that. And let's say I had 1,000 high schoolers and I could only teach them one thing about relationships, and you were both whispering in my ear. What would you want me to tell them?
Go ahead.
Well, I do think to not assume that you're right, to check out your story and be genuinely curious and interested that there is not just one way to do something. Reality is subjective. And if you get interested and curious in somebody else's position, there's an opening.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And this is CrisMarie. I would say practice listening and reflecting back out loud what you're hearing before you respond. Because so often we want to counter versus taking the time to actually let in and let that person's world land inside of us. And when most people don't need to get their way, but we all want to feel heard and considered, seen, heard, and considered. Mm-hmm. And so when I reflect back what you're saying to me, that's a way to communicate to you that I am seeing you. And you can readjust if it's not quite right so that we have clarity.
Yeah, simple and profound though, right? So cool. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Susan and CrisMarie. Where can people find out more about what you two are up to?
Yes, our website is Thrive Inc. That's www.thriveinc.com. And we do have a handout, like a free workbook that we can offer. Should I do that now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We have this for all the young listeners. They can text this. You'll get a free How to Have Tough Conversations at Work workbook. Mm-hmm. So it's all you have to do is text 406-350-7691. That's 406-350-7691. And text that number, your name and your email address. And when you get a reply, all you have to do is type the word beauty, BEAUTY, for the beauty of conflict. And the workbook will wind up in your email box.
Amazing. Cool. Thanks for offering that free resource for the listeners here.
You bet.
Okay, nice to meet you guys, and thanks for doing what you're doing in the world. We certainly need it, so I appreciate that a lot.
You too.
Appreciate the connection. Yes. Thanks, Jason.
All right.
Okay, action step. Go check them out, thriveinc.com. Text that number if you want their little free thing, how to have difficult conversations at work, I think it was. That's in the show notes, okay, if you need a reminder on that number. Okay, I think the action step here for me is at your place of employment, wherever that is. Now, some of you are self-employed, I understand that. So this is really you could apply this maybe to your family or try something else, I don't know. But this is for us, worker bees out there. Check this out. Lead with curiosity and ask a person that has a really strong opinion, can you help me understand why you feel so passionate or fired up about this? I think that was a really insightful question that I think it was CrisMarie was talking about. Just leading with that level of curiosity. Help me understand why this matters to you. That can shift organizations, and they gave an example there. I thought that was awesome. So do that, okay? And then share with a friend how it went. I did that. I challenged myself to ask and stay really curious at work, in a team meeting, etc. And I asked the question. Nice. Another challenge / action step, if you're a solopreneur or if you work for an organization, is to look at your company's values and see if it's true that you're not living them. And we here at the Relationship School, I think we're living our values, but I would rely on my team here to say, what do you think, guys? And every quarter we check in with our values and say, what do you think? And we make modifications. But if you feel like your organization is not living according to their values, company values, maybe offer a gentle challenge. Say, hey guys, we say respect, we say teamwork, but I hear shit talking behind the water cooler. To me, that's not teamwork. I just want to raise my hand and say, I think we could do something different here. And I really love work as a practice to use your voice, because a lot of us trade our voice for a paycheck, for example. So I challenge you to continue to speak up for yourself. And I know some of you, it's like you might lose your job, right? But what's a bigger price tag to pay? Your self-betrayal or your job? I don't know. I think you have to answer that question, okay? And then again, share with a friend if you accepted this challenge, okay? Nice. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you join our free Facebook group, relationshipschool.com/community. If you want to be a part of the ongoing weekly, daily, really hourly conversation, because there's thousands of people in there chatting it up, all about love, relationships, conflict, etc. Okay, I think you're going to dig it. And I'm in there doing Facebook Lives from time to time. I'm doing one today, actually, in 3 minutes. So I got to go. And back to my life. All right, enjoy the rest of your day, morning, evening, and we'll talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.